I never thought I would be dealing with police reports and grand theft charges when I bought my cabin in Whitefish, Montana. But Karen DeMarco had a talent for turning normal situations into legal nightmares. My name is Ryan Calloway, and I am a freelance software engineer who splits my time between remote work and enjoying the outdoor lifestyle that drew me to Montana in the first place. I purchased a modest 3-bedroom cabin in a community called Glacier Ridge Estates about 2 years ago, thinking it would be the perfect escape from my previous life in Seattle. The property came with mountain views, access to hiking trails, and during winter, some of the best snowmobiling terrain in the state. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that the Homeowners Association president, Karen DeMarco, treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. Karen was 53 years old, worked as a regional manager for a mid-sized insurance company called Mountain West Insurance Group, and had the kind of personality that made you understand why customer service representatives probably dreaded seeing her name pop up anywhere. She had that distinctive haircut, the one that seemed to defy both gravity and common sense, with blonde highlights that looked like they were applied with a paintbrush in the dark. Her voice had this nasal quality that could cut through walls, and she used it frequently during HOA meetings to remind everyone that rules existed for a reason, usually while making up new rules on the spot. The snowmobile situation started in early December, right after the first major snowfall of the season. I had just taken delivery of a brand new Ski-Doo Renegade X, a beautiful machine in electric blue with all the upgrades. I had saved for over a year to afford it, and it was parked proudly in my driveway under a weather-resistant cover. The purchase set me back nearly $18,000, which represented a significant chunk of my savings. But I figured I deserved something nice after landing several high-paying contracts that year. The trouble began on a Tuesday morning when I was in my home office on a video call with a client in New York. I heard a knock at my door, the kind of aggressive rapping that suggested the person on the other side had never learned the concept of patience. I muted my microphone, excused myself, and opened the door to find Karen standing there with a clipboard, because of course she had a clipboard. "Ryan, we need to talk about your vehicle situation," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries like hello or good morning. "What vehicle situation?" I asked, genuinely confused. "That monstrosity in your driveway," she said, gesturing toward my covered snowmobile. "According to HOA bylaws, recreational vehicles must be stored out of sight. That means in your garage or in an appropriate storage facility." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting into an argument with Karen was like wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. "Karen, I have read the HOA bylaws multiple times. The rules about recreational vehicles specifically mention RVs, boats, and trailers. Snowmobiles are not classified as recreational vehicles under Montana state law. They are registered as off-highway vehicles." Her face turned an interesting shade of red that clashed with her blonde highlights. "I am the HOA president, and I determine how the bylaws are interpreted. That thing needs to be moved by Friday, or you will be facing daily fines of $50. "That is not how bylaws work," I said, keeping my voice level. "You cannot just make up interpretations. If you want to change the rules, it requires a vote from the HOA board and notification to all homeowners." "Are you challenging my authority?" she asked, her voice rising to that pitch that probably made dogs in the neighboring county uncomfortable. "I am asking you to follow the actual rules as written," I replied. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting." I closed the door, probably a bit more firmly than necessary, and returned to my call. Through my office window, I could see Karen standing in my driveway, taking photos of my snowmobile with her phone. I made a mental note to document everything, a decision that would prove crucial in the coming weeks. The next day, I received an official HOA violation notice in my mailbox. It was printed on HOA letterhead and cited Section 7.3 of the Community Bylaws regarding recreational vehicles. I pulled out my copy of the bylaws, which I had received when I purchased the property, and confirmed what I already knew. Section 7.3 said nothing about snowmobiles. It specifically mentioned recreational vehicles exceeding 20 feet in length, which clearly did not apply to my 10-foot-long snowmobile. I drafted a polite but firm response, citing the exact bylaw language and explaining why the violation notice was invalid. I submitted it to the HOA board through their official email address and figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Karen showed up at my door again on Thursday, this time with another HOA board member named Patricia Hendricks. Patricia was in her 60s, retired, and generally seemed like a reasonable person who had the misfortune of getting roped into HOA leadership because no one else wanted the job. "Ryan, we have received your response," Karen said, "and the board has decided to uphold the violation. You have until Sunday to remove the snowmobile or fines will begin accruing on Monday." Patricia looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Actually, Karen, I think Ryan has a point. The bylaws do not specifically mention snowmobiles, and since they are common in Montana, maybe we should clarify the language before enforcing this." Karen shot Patricia a look that could have frozen the nearby Flathead Lake. "The board has decided, Patricia. That means you and me, and since it is a tie, my vote as president breaks it." "That is not how a two-person board works," I interjected. "You need a quorum, which according to your own bylaws requires at least 3 board members for any official decision." "Last I checked, the board is supposed to have 5 members. The other positions are vacant," Karen snapped. "Then maybe you should fill them before making unilateral decisions," I suggested. This back and forth continued for another 10 minutes, going nowhere. Patricia eventually excused herself, apologizing quietly as she left. Karen stood her ground, insisting the fines would start Monday regardless of what I thought about the bylaws. That weekend, I decided to take my new snowmobile out for its inaugural run. The weather was perfect, with fresh powder and clear skies. I loaded up my gear, started the machine, and spent Saturday exploring the trails around Glacier National Park. The snowmobile performed beautifully, and for a few hours, I forgot all about Karen and her nonsensical rules. When I returned home Saturday evening, I noticed something odd. The cover on my snowmobile was not quite right. I always tucked it in a specific way, and someone had definitely moved it. I checked the machine carefully, looking for damage or tampering, but everything seemed fine. I chalked it up to wind or maybe a curious neighbor and did not think much more about it. Sunday morning, I woke up to find my snowmobile missing. Not just uncovered, but completely gone from my driveway. My first thought was theft, and I immediately called the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Martinez arrived within 30 minutes, took my statement, and examined the area where the snowmobile had been parked. "Any idea who might have taken it?" he asked, making notes in a small notebook. "I have a suspicion," I said, and explained the situation with Karen and the HOA dispute. Deputy Martinez raised his eyebrows. "So your HOA president threatened you about the snowmobile, and now it is missing." "I know how it sounds," I admitted, "but Karen has a history of overstepping. I just do not know if she would actually steal someone's property." "Let me make some calls," the deputy said. "In the meantime, Do you have the serial number and registration? I provided all the documentation, including photos I had taken of the snowmobile for insurance purposes. The deputy said he would be in touch and advised me to check with neighbors to see if anyone had security cameras that might have caught something. I spent the rest of Sunday knocking on doors. Most of my neighbors were sympathetic, but had not seen anything. Then I reached the Hendersons, a young couple who lived 3 houses down. Mark Henderson mentioned that he had a doorbell camera that faced the street and might have captured passing vehicles. "Let me check the footage," Mark said, pulling up the app on his phone. We scrolled through several hours of recording from Saturday night into Sunday morning. At approximately 4:30 in the morning, we saw something interesting. A large pickup truck, dark-colored, possibly blue or black, drove slowly down our street. It stopped in front of my house, and although the lighting was not great, we could see someone get out and walk up my driveway. "Can you zoom in?" I asked. Mark tried, but the resolution was not high enough to make out specific features. However, we could see that the person appeared to be wearing a light-colored jacket and moved with a purposeful stride. About 15 minutes later, the same person returned, this time walking backward down my driveway. The camera angle made it clear why they were walking backward. They were towing my snowmobile. "Holy hell," Mark said. "Someone actually stole your snowmobile." We watched as the person loaded the snowmobile into the bed of the pickup truck, secured it, and drove away. The license plate was not visible due to the angle and lighting, but we had clear footage of the theft occurring. "Can you send me this video?" I asked. "Absolutely," Mark said. "This is crazy. Who steals a snowmobile at 4:30 in the morning?" I had a pretty good idea, but I needed more evidence. I called Deputy Martinez back and explained what we had found. He returned to collect the video footage and promised to investigate further. Monday morning arrived, and with it, a notice on my door from the HOA. It stated that since I had failed to remove the recreational vehicle by the deadline, I was now subject to $50 daily fines until compliance was achieved. The notice was dated that morning and signed by Karen DeMarco. I called Patricia Hendricks, the other board member, and explained everything that had happened. She was horrified. "Ryan, I had no idea about any of this," she said. "Karen told me you had moved the snowmobile over the weekend. She said the issue was resolved." "Well, someone moved it, but it was not me," I replied. "Patricia, I think Karen might have stolen my snowmobile." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That is a serious accusation. I know, and I am not making it lightly, but the timing is very suspicious. She threatens me about the snowmobile, it disappears, and then she immediately issues a fine notice claiming I am in compliance because it is gone." Patricia agreed to look into it and said she would reach out to Karen for an explanation. Meanwhile, I filed an official theft report with my insurance company and began documenting everything in a detailed timeline. Tuesday afternoon, Deputy Martinez called with an update. "Mr. Calloway, we have been investigating your case, and I need to ask you a few questions. Do you know if Karen DeMarco drives a dark blue Ford F-150? My heart rate picked up. "I have seen her driving a blue truck, yes." "Why?" We pulled registration records, and she owns a 2022 Ford F-150 in dark blue. "Based on the video footage and the timeline you provided, we would like to search her property. To do that, we need to establish probable cause. I am going to be direct with you. This could turn into a serious criminal matter." "I understand," I said. "I just want my snowmobile back." The deputy explained that they would attempt to interview Karen first, to give her a chance to explain the situation. He cautioned me not to approach her directly or do anything that could compromise their investigation. Wednesday morning, I was working from home when I saw a sheriff's department vehicle pull up to Karen's house, which was located at the opposite end of our street. Karen lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a sprawling ranch-style place with an oversized garage. I resisted the urge to walk down there and instead focused on my work, though I kept glancing out the window every few minutes. About an hour later, Deputy Martinez called me. "Mr. Calloway, we have located your snowmobile. It is in Karen DeMarco's garage, covered with a tarp." She initially denied having it, but when we explained that we had probable cause to search the property, she became very nervous and eventually admitted that the snowmobile was there. "So she did steal it," I said, not sure whether to be relieved or angry. "It appears that way." Her story is that she was confiscating it due to HOA violations and planned to release it once you paid the fines. Obviously, that is not how property disputes work. We are treating this as a theft case. Given the value of the snowmobile, this would be classified as felony theft. In Montana, I knew that theft of property valued over $1,500 was considered felony theft, which carried serious penalties including potential prison time. My $18,000 snowmobile definitely qualified. "What happens now?" I asked. "We are processing the scene and collecting evidence. Your snowmobile will be returned to you once we have finished documenting everything. Miss DeMarco is being arrested and will be charged with felony theft. She will be taken to the county jail for booking and will have an initial appearance before a judge within 48 hours. The news spread through Glacier Ridge estates like wildfire. By Wednesday evening, my phone was ringing constantly with neighbors calling to express their shock and disbelief. Some people were supportive, while others seemed to think there must have been a misunderstanding. A few neighbors mentioned that they had their own conflicts with Karen over the years, ranging from disputes about fence colors to arguments about holiday decorations. Thursday morning, I drove to the sheriff's office to retrieve my snowmobile. It was undamaged, which was a relief, though I noticed some scratches on the skis that had not been there before. Deputy Martinez explained that Karen had dragged it rather than properly loading it, which accounted for the new damage. "We have charged her with felony theft," the deputy explained. The prosecutor's office is also considering additional charges related to abuse of authority. Because she used her position as HOA president to justify taking your property, there might be aggravating factors. I thanked him for his work and loaded my snowmobile back onto my trailer. As I drove home, I felt a mix of emotions. I was glad to have my property back, but the whole situation felt surreal. How had a simple disagreement over parking escalated to criminal charges? Friday afternoon, Patricia Hendricks called an emergency HOA meeting. Given everything that had happened, she felt it was important to address the situation with the community. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of our development. About 30 homeowners attended, which was a significant turnout considering our community had roughly 75 homes. Patricia opened the meeting by explaining that Karen had been arrested and charged with theft. She assured everyone that the HOA board took the matter seriously and that steps were being taken to ensure proper governance moving forward. "I want to be clear," Patricia said, addressing the room. "What Karen did was not sanctioned by the HOA board. She acted unilaterally and illegally. The board does not have the authority to confiscate property, and even if there was a legitimate violation, which there was not in this case, the proper remedy would be through fines and ultimately liens, not theft." Several homeowners raised concerns about other decisions Karen had made during her tenure as president. One couple mentioned that they had been fined for painting their front door a color that was supposedly not approved, even though they had checked the architectural guidelines beforehand. Another homeowner talked about being threatened with legal action over a garden gnome that Karen deemed inappropriate. The meeting lasted over 2 hours, with Patricia taking detailed notes about various complaints and concerns. By the end, there was a general consensus that the HOA needed serious reforms. Patricia proposed appointing interim board members to fill the vacant positions and scheduling a special election to establish new leadership. Everyone voted in favor. As people were leaving, several neighbors approached me to apologize. They admitted that they had heard Karen's version of events and had assumed I was being difficult about a legitimate HOA concern. Now that the truth had come out, they felt bad for not supporting me earlier. "Do not worry about it," I told them. Karen was convincing, and most people want to believe their HOA president is acting in good faith. Over the weekend, I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Karen had been released on bail Friday evening. Her bail was set at $10,000, and she had to surrender her passport and agree not to contact me or anyone else in Glacier Ridge Estates. I also heard that her employer, Mountain West Insurance Group, had placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal case. Monday morning brought new developments. I received a certified letter from Karen's attorney, a lawyer named Douglas Mitchell from a firm in Kalispell. The letter claimed that the entire situation was a misunderstanding, and that Karen had been acting in her official capacity as HOA president to enforce community bylaws. The letter suggested that if I dropped the charges and agreed not to pursue civil action, Karen would resign from the HOA board and apologize publicly. I immediately contacted my own attorney, Robert Chen, who I had hired over the weekend specifically to deal with the legal fallout from this mess. Robert was a sharp guy in his 40s who specialized in property law and had experience with HOA disputes. "This letter is ridiculous," Robert said after reading it. "First, you cannot drop criminal charges. That is up to the prosecutor. Second, even if you could, why would you? She committed a crime. Third, her offer is insulting. She steals your property, and in exchange for resigning from a volunteer position, you are supposed to just forget about it. What do you think I should do?" I asked. "Nothing," Robert said. "Let the criminal case proceed. In the meantime, we should consider filing a civil lawsuit for conversion, emotional distress, and any damages you incurred. The scratches on your snowmobile alone constitute property damage. Plus, you had to take time off work to deal with this, right?" He was right. I had lost at least 20 hours of billable time dealing with police reports, insurance claims, and meetings. At my consulting rate of $150 per hour, that represented $3,000 in lost income. "Let me draft a response to their attorney," Robert said. "We will make it clear that you are not interested in settling, and that you intend to pursue all available legal remedies." The preliminary hearing for Karen's criminal case was scheduled for mid-January. In Montana, a preliminary hearing is where the prosecution presents evidence to show there is probable cause that a crime was committed and that the defendant committed it. If the judge finds probable cause, the case proceeds to district court for trial. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, life in Glacier Ridge Estates began to normalize. Patricia worked with several other homeowners to establish an interim board and began the process of reviewing all of Karen's decisions as HOA president. They discovered numerous problems, including unauthorized expenditures, improperly issued fines, and violations that had been selectively enforced based on Karen's personal relationships with homeowners. The interim board voted to rescind all fines that Karen had issued in the past year and to conduct a comprehensive audit of HOA finances. They also voted to formally remove Karen from the board, even though she had technically been suspended due to her arrest. I continued with my normal routine, working remotely and enjoying my snowmobile on weekends. The scratches had been professionally repaired, and my insurance company had covered the costs minus my deductible. They were also pursuing subrogation against Karen, meaning they would seek reimbursement from her for the money they paid out. The preliminary hearing arrived on January 14th. I had to appear as a witness, which meant sitting in the Flathead County Justice Center waiting to be called. The courthouse was a modern building in Kalispell, about 20 minutes from my home in Whitefish. Karen arrived with her attorney, Douglas Mitchell. She was dressed conservatively in a dark pantsuit, and her usually bold makeup was toned down. She avoided making eye contact with me, which was fine by me. The hearing was presided over by Judge Harold Stevenson, a veteran judge in his 60s with a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. The prosecutor, Assistant County Attorney Lisa Brennan, called Deputy Martinez as the first witness. He testified about responding to my theft report, reviewing the video footage, and ultimately locating the snowmobile in Karen's garage. Deputy Martinez, when you interviewed Miss DeMarco, what did she say about how the snowmobile came to be in her possession? Lisa Brennan asked. Initially, she denied knowing anything about it, the deputy testified. When I informed her that we had video evidence and probable cause to search her property, she changed her story. She said that she had taken the snowmobile because Mr. Calloway was violating HOA rules and that she planned to return it once he paid the fines she had imposed. Did she have any legal authority to take someone else's property in that manner? The prosecutor asked. No, madam. HOA boards can impose fines and place liens on properties, but they cannot confiscate personal property. What Miss DeMarco did constitutes theft under Montana law. Douglas Mitchell Cross examined the deputy, trying to establish that Karen had believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. The deputy acknowledged that Karen had made that claim, but reiterated that believing you have authority does not make an action legal. I was called to testify next. Lisa Brennan walked me through the timeline of events, from Karen's initial complaint about my snowmobile to discovering it missing to receiving the violation notice after it was stolen. Mr. Calloway, did you give Miss DeMarco permission to take your snowmobile? She asked. Absolutely not, I said. Did you ever agree to let the HOA confiscate your property? No, the HOA does not have that authority, and Karen knew it. We had multiple conversations where I explained that her interpretation of the bylaws was incorrect. Douglas Mitchell tried to paint me as combative and unreasonable during cross-examination, suggesting that I had been deliberately difficult about a simple HOA request. I kept my answers short and factual, not taking the bait. Mr. Calloway, is it fair to say you and Miss DeMarco had a contentious relationship? He asked. I would say that Karen and I disagreed about how the HOA bylaws should be applied, I replied. I was not contentious. I simply asked her to follow the rules as written. But you refused to move your snowmobile, even after being asked multiple times. I declined to move my snowmobile because there was no valid reason to do so. The bylaws did not require it, and I had every right to park on my own property. The hearing lasted about 2 hours. At the end, Judge Stevenson ruled that there was sufficient probable cause to bind Karen over for trial in district court. He also denied a motion from Douglas Mitchell to reduce the charges from felony theft to misdemeanor theft, noting that the value of the snowmobile clearly met the statutory threshold for felony charges. As we left the courthouse, Robert Chen, my attorney, seemed satisfied. "That went well," he said. The judge clearly was not buying the defense's argument that she thought she had authority. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, especially when she was explicitly told she was wrong. "What happens next?" I asked. "The case will be assigned to a district court judge, and there will be an arraignment where Karen enters a plea. Given the strength of the evidence, I would not be surprised if her attorney tries to negotiate a plea deal. If she is smart, she will plead guilty to a reduced charge and accept whatever punishment the prosecutor offers." A week after the preliminary hearing, I received news that Karen had been fired from her job at Mountain West Insurance Group. According to my neighbors who followed the story closely, the insurance company had conducted their own investigation and determined that Karen's arrest and the surrounding circumstances reflected poorly on the company. Her termination was effective immediately, and she would not be receiving severance. This was a significant development. Karen had worked for Mountain West for over 15 years and had been in management for the last 8. Losing that job meant losing her income, her health insurance, and potentially her ability to afford her mortgage. While I did not take pleasure in anyone's misfortune, it was hard to feel too sorry for someone who had stolen my property and tried to justify it. February brought more changes. The HOA held its special election, and 3 new board members were elected. Patricia Hendricks agreed to stay on, providing continuity, and the new board immediately began implementing reforms. They updated the bylaws to include clearer language about enforcement procedures, established a proper appeals process for violations, and created transparency requirements for board decisions. The criminal case moved forward slowly, as these things often do. Karen was arraigned in district court in late February and pleaded not guilty, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. Her attorney was still trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not offering anything particularly generous given the egregious nature of the offense. In March, Robert Chen filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf against Karen. The suit sought damages for the theft, property damage to the Snowmobile, lost income, emotional distress, and attorney's fees. We were asking for $50,000 in total, which Robert assured me was reasonable given the circumstances. Karen's attorney responded with a motion to dismiss, arguing that I had not suffered sufficient damages to justify a lawsuit. Judge Martha Riley, who was assigned to the civil case, denied the motion. She noted in her written order that theft of an $18,000 vehicle, combined with documented property damage and lost income, clearly met the threshold for a valid civil claim. April brought the long-awaited resolution to the criminal case. After months of negotiations, Karen agreed to plead guilty to felony theft in exchange for a sentencing recommendation from the prosecutor. The deal called for 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution to me and my insurance company, and a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership position in Montana. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for April 23rd. I attended, along with several of my neighbors who wanted to see justice served. Karen stood before Judge Stevenson and formally entered her guilty plea. She looked tired and defeated, a far cry from the aggressive, overbearing HOA president who had knocked on my door 5 months earlier. Judge Stevenson accepted the plea agreement but added some additional conditions. "Miss DeMarco, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that position to commit a crime. You stole a valuable piece of property from someone who was simply exercising their legal rights as a homeowner. This court takes such offenses seriously." He sentenced her to 3 years supervised probation, with the possibility of it being reduced to unsupervised after 18 months if she complied with all conditions. In addition to the community service and restitution, he ordered her to undergo counseling to address what he called control issues and poor decision-making. If you violate any condition of your probation, you will serve the suspended sentence of 3 years in the Montana Women's Prison, the judge warned. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Karen said quietly. After the hearing, the prosecutor informed me that Karen had already begun making restitution payments. She had sold her truck, the same one she had used to steal my snowmobile, and used the proceeds to pay back my insurance company and cover the cost of the repairs. She still owed me for lost income and other damages, which would be paid in monthly installments. The civil lawsuit was settled in May. Rather than go through a trial, Karen agreed to pay me $35,000 over 3 years. Her attorney had argued that she could not afford the full $50,000 I was seeking, and after reviewing her financial situation, Robert Chen advised me that $35,000 was probably the most we could realistically collect. She is unemployed, her savings are depleted from legal fees, and she is barely hanging onto her house, Robert explained. If we push for the full amount and she declares bankruptcy, you might end up with nothing. $35,000, while less than we asked for, is a guaranteed payment. I agreed to the settlement. The money was not really the point anyway. The case had always been about holding Karen accountable for her actions and making sure she understood that stealing someone's property was unacceptable, regardless of whatever authority she thought she had. Life in Glacier Ridge Estates improved dramatically under the new HOA board. They were responsive to homeowner concerns, transparent in their decision-making, and actually followed the bylaws instead of making up rules as they went along. Several neighbors who had been fined unfairly by Karen received refunds, and the architectural committee was reformed to include more diverse perspectives. I continued to park my snowmobile in my driveway during winter months, and no one said a word about it. In fact, a few other neighbors bought snowmobiles of their own and started joining me on weekend trail rides. We formed an informal club and explored different areas around Whitefish and Glacier National Park. Karen moved out of Glacier Ridge Estates in August. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had sold her house, unable to keep up with the mortgage payments without her insurance job. She relocated to Missoula, where she had family, and was reportedly working in retail while looking for another position in her field. Her criminal record and the circumstances of her termination made it difficult to find employment in insurance management. Patricia Hendricks remained on the HOA board and became a good friend. We occasionally had coffee and laughed about how crazy the whole situation had been. She admitted that she had been intimidated by Karen for years and had gone along with questionable decisions because she did not want to deal with the conflict. I should have stood up to her earlier, Patricia said during one of our conversations. Maybe if I had, none of this would have happened. You did stand up to her when it mattered, I replied. You supported me during the investigation and you helped reform the HOA afterward. That takes courage. The story became something of a legend in our community. New homeowners moving into Glacier Ridge Estates would inevitably hear about the time the HOA president stole someone's snowmobile and ended up with a felony conviction. It served as a cautionary tale about the importance of checks and balances in community governance. For me, the experience was educational in ways I never expected. I learned about the criminal justice system, property law, and the importance of documentation. I also learned that standing up for your rights, even when it is uncomfortable, is sometimes necessary. If I had backed down and moved my snowmobile just to avoid conflict, Karen would have continued to abuse her authority, and other homeowners would have suffered. My snowmobile continued to provide countless hours of enjoyment. Every time I fired it up and headed out to the trails, I felt grateful that the situation had been resolved justly. The machine represented more than just a recreational vehicle. It symbolized the principle that no one, not even a HOA president, is above the law. The criminal restitution and civil settlement payments came regularly for the next 3 years. Karen never missed a payment, which I took as a sign that she had learned something from the experience. I deposited the money into a savings account and eventually used part of it to upgrade my home office and take a long, overdue vacation to Alaska. By the time the final payment arrived in May of the following year, I had almost forgotten about the daily stress and frustration of dealing with Karen's theft and the subsequent legal proceedings. Life had moved on, and Glacier Ridge Estates had become the peaceful mountain community I had hoped for when I first moved there. The new HOA board continued to function smoothly, making reasonable decisions and treating homeowners with respect. They implemented a monthly newsletter to keep everyone informed about community matters, organized social events that brought neighbors together, and maintained the common areas without unnecessary drama. I often reflected on how differently things could have gone. If the Hendersons had not had that doorbell camera, or if Deputy Martinez had not been thorough in his investigation, Karen might have gotten away with stealing my snowmobile. She could have claimed it was towed by some third party, or that I had moved it myself and was trying to frame her. The video evidence made all the difference. The experience also taught me about the importance of knowing your rights and having good documentation. I had kept copies of all my communications with Karen, the HOA bylaws, and my snowmobile's registration and purchase records. When the situation escalated to criminal charges and a civil lawsuit, having that paper trail made everything much easier. I also gained a new appreciation for the legal system, despite its flaws and frustrations. The prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement officers I dealt with were professional and took my case seriously. They understood that theft is theft, regardless of whether the perpetrator is a common criminal or a homeowners association president. Looking back, I sometimes wondered what Karen was thinking that early Sunday morning when she decided to steal my snowmobile. Did she genuinely believe she had the authority to confiscate it? Was she so used to getting her way in HOA matters that she thought the normal rules did not apply to her? Or was it simply a vindictive act by someone who could not stand being challenged? I never got answers to those questions, and ultimately, it did not matter. Karen made her choices, and she paid the consequences. She lost her job, her reputation, her home in our community, and gained a felony conviction that would follow her for the rest of her life. All because she could not accept that a homeowner had the right to park a legally registered vehicle on his own property. The broader lesson, I think, is about power and accountability. HOA boards wield significant authority over people's homes and daily lives. When that power is exercised responsibly, HOAs can enhance property values and create pleasant communities. But when individuals like Karen abuse that power for personal reasons or ego gratification, the results can be devastating. The reforms implemented by the new HOA board in Glacier Ridge Estates addressed many of these concerns. They created term limits for board positions, established clearer procedures for addressing disputes, and required all major decisions to be voted on by the full membership rather than made unilaterally by the president. These changes helped ensure that what happened with Karen could not easily happen again. Several neighbors thanked me over the months and years that followed for standing up to Karen. They shared their own stories of unreasonable demands and arbitrary enforcement of rules that had made their lives more difficult. Some had considered moving away from Glacier Ridge Estates because of the toxic HOA environment. With Karen gone and real reforms in place, those neighbors decided to stay. I remained in my cabin, continuing to work remotely and enjoy the Montana lifestyle. The snowmobile that started the whole saga remained my favorite possession, and I used it regularly throughout each winter season. On particularly beautiful days, riding through fresh powder with mountain views stretching in every direction, I felt grateful for the life I had built in Whitefish. The legal proceedings had been stressful and time-consuming, but they were worth it. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for everyone in the community who had suffered under Karen's arbitrary rule. The criminal conviction and civil settlement sent a clear message that HOA board members are not above the law and that property rights matter. In a strange way, Karen did me a favor. Her theft of my snowmobile exposed the dysfunction in our HOA and catalyzed meaningful reforms. If she had simply accepted my initial explanation about the bylaws and moved on, she might still be HOA president today, making life miserable for other homeowners with her next arbitrary rule interpretation. Instead, Glacier Ridge Estates became a model for how HOAs should operate. Patricia and the new board members presented at a regional HOA conference, sharing the lessons learned from the Karen situation and offering advice on governance best practices. Other communities reached out asking for guidance on implementing similar reforms. The story even attracted some media attention. A reporter from the Whitefish pilot wrote an article about HOA abuses and used Karen's case as a cautionary example. The article sparked discussions on local community forums about the need for better oversight of HOA boards and stronger protections for homeowners. As for Karen herself, I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. She had found work as an assistant manager at a retail store in Missoula and was living in a modest apartment. By all accounts, she kept a low profile and avoided any activities that would draw attention to her criminal record. She completed her probation requirements on time and gradually paid off all the restitution and civil settlement amounts. I bore her no ill will by that point. Anger and resentment are exhausting emotions, and I had moved past them. What happened was a stark reminder that people sometimes make terrible decisions when they feel their authority is being challenged, and that accountability is essential for preventing abuse. My final interaction related to the case came 3 years after the initial theft when I received the last settlement payment. Along with the check was a brief handwritten note from Karen. It simply said, "I am sorry for what I did. You were right and I was wrong. I hope you can forgive me someday." I appreciated the apology, even though it came years late. It suggested that Karen had done some genuine reflection and perhaps grown as a person through the consequences of her actions. I did not respond to the note, feeling that the chapter was truly closed, but I kept it as a reminder that people are capable of acknowledging their mistakes, even when those mistakes have serious consequences. The snowmobile that sparked the entire saga eventually accumulated thousands of miles over the years. I maintained it meticulously, and it never gave me significant problems. Every time I saw it in my driveway or garage, I remembered the journey from that first confrontation with Karen to the final resolution of all legal matters. Glacier Ridge Estates continued to thrive under competent HOA leadership. Property values increased, new families moved in, and the sense of community strengthened. The monthly social events organized by the HOA, including summer barbecues and winter hot chocolate gatherings, brought neighbors together in ways that had never happened under Karen's tenure. I made lasting friendships with people who I might never have gotten to know if the snowmobile incident had not occurred. Shared adversity has a way of bonding people together, and many homeowners who had felt isolated or intimidated by Karen's management style found their voice in the aftermath. The experience influenced how I approached conflicts in other areas of my life. I became more willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. I also became more careful about documentation and following proper procedures, lessons that served me well in both personal and professional contexts. Years later, sitting on my deck watching the sun set over the mountains, I sometimes reflected on that December morning when Karen first knocked on my door to complain about my snowmobile. If someone had told me then that the situation would escalate to criminal charges, a civil lawsuit, and national media attention, I would not have believed them. Yet that is exactly what happened, all because one person let power go to her head and made a series of catastrophically poor decisions. The story of Karen and the stolen snowmobile became part of local folklore, a tale told at community gatherings, and shared with newcomers as an explanation for why the HOA bylaws were so detailed and why checks and balances were so important. It served as an ongoing reminder that community governance requires integrity, transparency, and respect for individual rights. In the end, my simple desire to own and park a snowmobile at my own home led to meaningful change for an entire community. It exposed corruption, prompted reforms, and demonstrated that ordinary citizens have the power to hold authority figures accountable. Those outcomes were worth far more than the snowmobile itself, though I remained quite fond of that machine and the adventures it enabled. The Montana winters continued to bring heavy snow and excellent riding conditions. I continued to work remotely, building my freelance software engineering business and enjoying the flexibility of mountain life. The cabin that had seemed like such a risk when I left Seattle proved to be one of the best decisions I ever made, even accounting for the drama with Karen. Looking out at my snowmobile parked proudly in my driveway, exactly where it belonged, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, the community had been reformed, and life had returned to the peaceful mountain existence I had sought when I moved to Whitefish. Sometimes standing up for what is right requires going through difficult experiences, but the outcome makes it worthwhile. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to work. Karen had been held accountable for her crime through criminal prosecution and civil liability. She lost her job not because of vindictive reporting, but because her employer rightfully determined that someone convicted of theft should not hold a position of trust in an insurance company. Every consequence she faced was a direct result of her own choices. For my part, I received justice in the form of criminal prosecution, financial compensation, and the satisfaction of knowing that other homeowners would not suffer similar abuses. The new HOA board respected property rights and followed proper procedures, creating an environment where people could enjoy their homes without fear of arbitrary enforcement or power trips. The community of Glacier Ridge Estates emerged stronger from the experience. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves became more engaged in community affairs. HOA meetings went from tense, Karen-dominated affairs to productive discussions where multiple viewpoints were welcomed. The monthly newsletter kept everyone informed about decisions and upcoming projects. As spring turned to summer and then back to fall, life continued its normal rhythms. I worked on software projects, hiked the surrounding mountains, and prepared for another winter of snowmobiling. The machine that had caused so much trouble remained reliable and fun, providing exactly the kind of recreation I had envisioned when I made the purchase. The story serves as a reminder that homeowners associations, despite their sometimes controversial reputation, can function properly when led by people of integrity who respect the rights of their neighbors. It also demonstrates that when HOA leaders abuse their authority, there are legal remedies available to hold them accountable. My journey from a simple property dispute to criminal charges and civil litigation was not one I had sought or wanted, but it taught me valuable lessons about standing firm in the face of unreasonable demands, the importance of documentation and evidence, and the fact that the legal system, while imperfect, can deliver justice when properly engaged. The final chapter of the Karen saga closed with her last payment and apology note, but the positive changes it brought to Glacier Ridge Estates continued indefinitely. New homeowners moving into the development benefited from the reformed HOA structure without necessarily knowing the full story of how those reforms came about. That was fine with me. The point was never to be a hero or seek recognition, but simply to protect my property rights and ensure fair treatment for everyone in the community. As I loaded my snowmobile onto the trailer for another weekend adventure through the pristine Montana wilderness, I smiled thinking about how far things had come. What started as Karen's attempt to control where I parked my vehicle had ended with her facing criminal charges, losing her job, and ultimately leaving the community in disgrace. Meanwhile, I continued to enjoy my property and my freedom, exactly as I had every right to do from the beginning. Justice, it turned out, was not just an abstract concept, but something that could be achieved through persistence, proper documentation, and willingness to stand up for what was right, even when facing intimidation from someone in authority.